Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Thank you for listening in again to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and I am joined by Bill Roden. Bill, I was pronouncing that name correctly, right? It is Roden.
That's correct.
All right.
Yep, Roden.
Yeah. So I am actually remote in Miramar Beach, close to Destin, Florida. And Bill and I wanted to get together and schedule something for us to talk and get him on the podcast right away. So, Bill, it's really interesting to me your transition from collecting to making knives, and I want to talk about both facets, like what got you into knives and collecting, and
Sure.
then knife making. But what I'd really like to know, and what I don't really know a lot about you, is your your zero to getting into knife collecting life. So could you give me and the listeners a picture of where you got started, grew up, family, things like that, and maybe career type of things?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I grew up in Titusville, Pennsylvania. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Titusville, Titusville is actually the birthplace of the oil industry. The first oil well was drilled in Titusville, just outside of Titusville in 1859. And of course, then there weren't any automobiles. It was used as a replacement for whale oil. So that's kind of Titusville's beginning, and that's how it got on the map. But if you're a knife guy, and I'm sure many of you are that are listening, Titusville will ring a bell. It was the home of Queen Cutlery, and Queen was there for, I don't know, I guess 100 years, and that was just kind of part of everybody's DNA that was in Titusville. Not that big a company, but we all knew of it. We all knew it was a long-term company, and I had friends whose family was involved with Queen Cutlery. So that's just kind of in the blood from growing up in Titusville. And of course now Queen's gone from Titusville, but Great Eastern Cutlery is there. And in the building, one of the buildings, the lab building of the old Universal Cyclops Steel Company, which is like the second place I worked after I got out of high school. So I never really thought about it. I wasn't that into knives at the time, although of course I always had a pocket knife. But that's kind of maybe where the seed was planted. Growing up, Titusville is northwestern Pennsylvania, about 6,000 people, kind of in the foothills of the Allegheny Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains. So it's hilly, but it's not mountainous. But at that time, and I was born in the early 50s and grew up, of course, then in the 50s and the 60s. Spent a lot of time hunting and fishing, and it was the kind of place and the kind of time in history where a kid could take a shotgun and put it over his shoulder and walk out of town and up into the woods and go squirrel hunting or rabbit hunting or whatever. And same with fishing. My mom would take me, drop me off in a trout stream, at the head of a trout stream in the morning, and I'd work my way down basically all day long. And we had a time and place where we would meet, and she'd pick me up and bring me home. So spent a lot of time hunting and fishing, and mostly by myself. And that also kind of fits into the life of a knife maker. You spend a lot of time by yourself, but that's kind of the history of growing up. Got out of high school. Aaron and I were just talking. Didn't have a particularly happy home life. There was some turbulation involved there. My dad with alcohol, and I was uh, happy to get out of town and get out of Titusville basically the day after graduation. Went to work for the state of Pennsylvania at a park, and then I came back to Titusville and went to work for the steel company, which was the big employer there. That was about the time that the steel companies were struggling. It would have been the early 70s, and there was a layoff there. And my dad actually worked at a bank, and he was a trust officer at a bank. And I used his connections to uh, get myself a job as a bank teller. And kind of the rest of the story will be where Titusville kind of tied me to knife making and knives. The rest of my history really doesn't. I went to work for a bank in Mercer, Pennsylvania, not too far away from Titusville. Got married as a kid. I think I was 19 when I got married. Um, I was a bank teller, and I can remember exactly how much I made. I made 310 a month. So I had my wife and my child and myself in an apartment, a car payment, and our total income for the month was $310. So that was pretty tough going, in spite of the fact that I wore a shirt and tie to work. So I stayed there for not very long and ended up getting an opportunity to go to work for Household Finance, which was a personal loan company. Worked there for a couple of years and worked my way into banking. And I won't go on and on and on about the finance world, but in '79, and I was 27 years old. I finally moved out of Titusville. Finally got out of the small town atmosphere and got an opportunity to move to Atlanta and work for a company called GE Capital. Um, Worked there for a couple of years. Moved over to another company called the Associates, where I spent about 20 years. And they had, back in those days, they had branch offices. So to move up within the organization, you manage different branch offices, obviously of different sizes and increasing responsibility. So from Atlanta, I took my training in Atlanta and in Chicago, where the company was headquartered at the time. My first branch was in Kansas City. So I lived in Kansas City for about a year. Had the opportunity to take over another office in Baton Rouge. So we moved to Baton Rouge. Was there for just about a year, a little bit less, in the 80s, and basically turned off the lights in the Baton Rouge office. That was one of the oil and gas downturns. And of course, Louisiana is very much driven by oil and gas. Certainly was then. From Baton Rouge, ended up in Orlando. Ran the office there for several years, um, and eventually got moved to Dallas, which is where I am now. Side trip um, with my career, I left the associates. Basically, they were bought out, so they left me. But got to work for another company and moved to Wichita, Kansas. And then during that time, divorced and remarried. My stepkid's father lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, and since I'm a sales guy and really can kind of live anywhere, we went ahead and moved to Lincoln to make life better for the kids and so forth. So, kind of an interesting life at the Associates. I kind of skipped over it, but I made my way into management there and got to do a fair amount of travel. Um, Spent some time in Europe, spent some time in Mexico and Puerto Rico, and I am a lifetime gold member of the American Airlines frequent flyer membership. So that was hard earned and not worth it. But it was a really, really interesting experience from a high school educated boy from Titusville, Pennsylvania, to be doing the international travel and so forth. And all of this was involved in the equipment finance business. I've done it since I went to work for GE, primarily construction equipment. So it's a narrow niche, but I've made a living for a few decades doing construction equipment financing, basically providing financing on yellow iron. So that was and still is part of my career. I don't work for a company. Today I broker, so I've got customers who call me and when they want to acquire something, and I arrange the financing for them, and I'm able to make a little bit of money doing that. And appraising, I'm a certified appraiser again for equipment, and so I get an appraisal job from time to time. And when I'm not doing those two things, I'm out in the shop when it's not 105 degrees in Texas.
Yeah, so if I want to start prospecting for and doing gold mining, you're the kind of person to talk to about those big bulldozers and everything.
Well, gold miners are a little bit harder to get banks to approve. We'll put it that way. That's a little on the speculative side, although it makes great TV. It's a little on the speculative side, and it's kind of funny that I mean, gold mining, my whole career, from time to time, there'll be a gold mine opportunity that will present itself. And as many as there have been over the many years that I've worked, I don't remember a single one that I've ever gotten approved. And the only one I really am aware of that a company I worked for approved ended up being a foreclosure. So there were man camps, and was in Alaska, and it was just it was an ugly thing for the financial institution that made the loan. So that's probably why they're careful with those things.
Yeah,
But yes, if you want to go in the construction business or the sand and gravel business, that's call me. I'm the guy.
well, that's good. So, I mean, what got you into knives? For transitioning from this world of finance and I mean, you're in oil and gas, so I know that there's this portion that touches a community of workers and things that knives are very utilitarian to. But what caused you to do it?
Yeah, and it really wasn't. It really wasn't that. I again maybe again never thought about it subconsciously. The connection to Queen and GEC. I can't even say when I really started collecting knives. I had a lot of knives. I had, that I bought on eBay or just, shiny stuff. Not too many gas station knives, although there might be one or two of them. Might have been one or two of those mixed in. But when I can pinpoint when I started collecting knives, would have been in like 96, 97. My brother gave me, who still lived in Titusville, gave me a GEC knife. And 96 was the first year, at least that they stamped on the knives. I think it was 97 when they actually put them out. And I got interested in GEC, and um, they have done a really good job and started out doing a really good job of kind of catering to the collector community. And I had a goal at one time to collect all the knives that they made in 1996. And I got within two, I think, at one time. But so I started out collecting production knives and particularly GEC knives. Um, and I don't think I had. I think the first custom knife I bought was from Tom Krein, and interesting connection to Northwest Arkansas. I have my wife grew up in Northwest Arkansas, and her brother-in-law, former brother-in-law, I should say, worked for Tom for a period of time, and we were together for some family outing, and we got to talking, and he said, you worked for Tom Krein, this famous custom knife maker. I didn't know who Tom Krein was. No idea. Um, so I did some research and looked into it, and really because this guy worked there, I became interested. Not that he and I were particularly close. We weren't, but it just was a connection. So I looked into it and I entered a lottery that Tom had, and I don't know what year that would have been, probably early 2000s. Yeah, probably early 2000s, and won the lottery. And I just knew that my wife's brother-in-law was the reason that I had won the lottery, and I kind of did a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, nudge to Tom about winning the lottery. And he said, "Oh no, that's not how we do things. You actually did win the lottery." So anyway, I bought that knife, and I don't have that knife anymore. I unfortunately sold it, but that was my first custom knife. Collected Tom's knives. Um, because they're close together up there in the Northwest Arkansas, I got involved with buying some Chris Taylor knives, and then various makers. But really, I like Tom's fixed blades, and I'm still partial to fixed blades, small pocket carry fixed blades. Um, and that's kind of it. I mean, I've got uh, Luke Swenson knife. I've got Tim Robertson knife. I've got Bob Ullman knife. I've got knives from different makers, and I've kind of weaned down what I've got in my collection now, being my age and semi-retired. But uh, that's really kind of it. Once I got into the custom knife, I sold all the GECs. I sold all the other things that I had, and I really kind of focused on custom knives. Um, and and that leads me to how I got into knife making. So that would have been the early 2000s that I was kind of getting started, really getting started, um, and slowly becoming totally infatuated with the whole. I have an addictive personality, and uh, that's right now maybe knife collecting may be the healthiest addiction that I've ever had. So I remain a knife collector, a careful knife collector, but I digress. My son-in-law, who lives close to us here, and in fact we share a shop. My son-in-law was very interested in knife making, um, probably because of me. But Chris Taylor was having a class, and this would have been February of 2020, right before COVID hit. Um, and he did a lottery for 2 slots to spend a weekend with him and learn how to make a knife. And Olivia, my son-in-law, was interested. I really didn't care one way or the other, but I got in the lottery because again I collected Chris's knives, and I was just going to give Olivia the slot if I won and he didn't. Well, we both won, so he and I went up there that weekend in February and spent the weekend with Chris Taylor, and we both made a fixed blade knife. That was my first knife, and I do still have that knife for sure. Um, but it was just sort of a novelty for me. I mean, I was interested in knives, and that just made it more interesting. But and maybe some of the people that are listening know that I've got essential tremor, which is, and I've had it since I was basically since puberty. Early 20s is when I remember it first becoming a problem. But it's just my handshake. When I do things, my handshake. And there are medications that you can take, and I take them, but it doesn't solve the problem. So standing at a grinder, and holding my hands against the wheel and the blade, I can't hold still. So I spent uh, that weekend, I ended up with a couple of Band-Aids, to say the least. But uh, we made the knife, and I got to say, Chris probably made 80% of it for me because of that issue. But I learned, and I became interested. And fast forward, I mean, COVID hit, but fast forward, I want to say, must have been about July. There was a knife maker. Um, I'm not going to be able to say there's a Temple. What's the name of the town just south of Waco? I
Yeah.
think it's Temple. Anyway, um, he was a knife maker down there who I knew, and had bought a couple things from. Gotten in on lotteries, and I had a few of his things, but followed him on Facebook, and he uh, he and his wife unfortunately split up. He's a German, and he had been in Germany. He's coming back from Germany, and he posted on Facebook that he was going to move back to Germany. He's going to sell his shop. Anybody interested in any of the tools he might have, to get in touch with him. Well, I got in touch with him right away, and I basically I don't do forging. Again, the shaky hands aren't helpful to do something like that. But I bought everything else in his shop, and literally got the heat treat oven, the grinder, all of his belts, all of his handle material, all of the steel that he had, um, everything, and the bandsaw, and most of the stuff. I guess all of that stuff I still have in my shop. I've grown from there, but I bought his whole shop. So, and I sold a couple of Tom Krein knives. I had an Alpha, a Mammoth Alpha, which was kind of the cornerstone of me becoming a knife maker, which was interesting because Tom was the first uh, custom knife maker that I was aware of. So I sold that knife, I think, for $3,500, and sold some other knives, and so selling knives allowed me to buy this whole shop out. And man, we got it was the way to start because we got handle material, we got everything from soup to nuts, all the odds and ends that you don't think about when you're going into a hobby. We got them. We put them in boxes. We brought them back. We didn't even know what they were. And there may still be some unopened boxes in my shop, but uh, Olivio and I, and mostly Olivio, he's much younger than I am and much more mechanically inclined. We had a shop already, and we got it wired, and we got it set up. And it's a 30 by 60 metal building, no insulation, so it is hot in the summer and it is cold in the winter. But in between there, and in mornings or evenings, whenever we spend some time in there, and are able to kind of get into it. Um, and as far as getting into it, it had been months since I'd taken the class from Chris. So I thank God I'd taken some pictures. So took some pictures, kind of refreshed my memory. Chris and I had become friends in the meantime, so I didn't have a problem calling Chris and say, "Hey, remind me how we did this," or give me a hint here. I can't remember what the steps are to get this completed. And anyway, I got started. Ruined a bunch of steel trying to learn how to make knives, and I think everybody that makes knives understands what I'm saying there. I burned it up. I made mistakes I couldn't fix. I've got a wall of shame in my shop where I've got a bunch of ruined blades hanging there to remind me uh, uh, how human I am. But um, started making knives, and again, I mentioned the essential tremor. I looked around for jigs, something I could actually grind knives and not get my knuckles so close to the grinding um, belt. And Jerry Moen, local guy, and of course a long time knife maker. I think he was involved in the guild at the very beginning. Jerry Moen makes a fixture that is not inexpensive, but is really, really versatile as far as being able to set angles and set heights and maintain a constant degree of on the bevels on both sides. And that was just exactly what I needed to be able to get me started making knives. And so I bought one and met Jerry, and he and I, again, have become friends. But I probably couldn't make knives if it wasn't for, uh, I don't know that particular fixture, but I, I really believe in it. It totally helped me, and I wouldn't even try anything else. I'd spend the money. If anybody is listening here who's thinking about it, that is helpful. That probably saves you a year's worth of experience trying to do it by hand. Now, I, I don't. I mean, there are purists in the knife making world who don't believe in using fixtures, and I get it's more of an art when you can hold it and learn to get the muscle memory so that you know how to put that edge on each one and know where it's going to be. I get that, and that is an art. But I can also tell you that very well known knife makers who I know and whose shops I've been in have those fixtures and have Jerry Moen's fixtures. So, not to be an advertisement for Jerry, but for an old guy getting started in the knife business with tremors, uh, it was a godsend. I couldn't be doing it without him. So that was what they say, 2020, July of 2020. Um, Fast forward, I think it was April of 21 when I sold my first knife. Um, in the meantime, I had taken a class from Bob Ullman up in Sanger, a week long class, and that guy, uh, not as well known as some of the others, but he is an artist. I've got a knife of his from the Blade Show in Texas last year. They call it ice. No, it was Blade Show Texas last year. That's just amazing. He did 100%, including the engraving on the bolsters, and it's just a beautiful knife. The guy is just one of those guys. Former Army Ranger, has the prettiest, the nicest shop I've ever been in. Just and the class, a week long class that he gives. He only has two students. I would recommend that to anybody. But that was kind of the second level. I took that in February of 21, and again, I sold my first knife in April of 21. And I can remember, boy, I rattle on. You don't have to say anything, do you, Aaron? I can remember being in the class with, uh, uh, it'll come to me. Anyway, I'm in the class and we're talking about how we were doing things, and I told them that I had just gotten New Jersey Steel Baron to do some water jet cutting of some blanks for me, and Bob said, "Well, how many did you buy?" And I said, 75. And he said, 75? And you haven't ever sold a knife? I said, well, I got plans. So they kind of teased me that that had bitten off more than I could chew. But honestly, I was glad I did. I did sell all of those over the next year, and have bought many more in between. And, and that's, I mean, that's again, the purists might scoff at having your blades water jet cut, but I designed the blades and I had cut the blades out, the originals out on the bandsaw and done it all 100%. And I still do that when I'm working on something custom or if I'm working on a new design. But to stand at a bandsaw and cut out a knife profile to me is not particularly artistic, not particularly um, where I find the art in making knives. So I don't, unless it's something that is new, and I've recently done quite a few custom jobs and and tried out some new designs. But unless it's one of those, then I get a water jet cut, or just recently had some laser cut that I don't have in yet because it just makes the
Yeah,
job easier. You're starting out with a blank and not spending all that time. I actually send them all out for
yeah,
heat treat too. I do have a heat treat oven. I do heat treat some of them, but um, I when I get those cut, those 48 that I have out now, they're headed for Braddock to be heat treated, and they'll come back to me, and then I'll take them from there. So when I get the blanks ready to go, they're already obviously already cut, and they're already heat treated, and try to take them all to about 60 HRC, regardless of what the steel is, and go from there. And that to me, that's the art of it, to grinding the bevels to the handle work, and really kind of putting the whole thing together. Um, I mentioned that I took classes, and I don't think there's anything more important. Chris Taylor really helped me. Bob Ullman really helped me. Um, Tim Robertson. I took a day and went up there and watched him make a knife that I ended up buying from him. That was a great um, education for me to do. Tim is a super guy, really helpful, really he's got a mechanical mind, I guess is the way to put it, or an engineering mind. And he's come up with some fixtures to help people make folders and just it was a fascinating day. Got there at 8, and I think it was 9:30 in the evening when I finally left. So it was a long day, but I've got a beautiful knife as a result, and I learned a lot of things. And again, learning from the community, there's just it's it's a shockingly open community as far as people sharing information and helping each other. Um, it's I can't say it's even really competitive. I mean, I know it is, but we're all trying to sell a few knives and to stay in the knife making uh, profession, if you will. But everybody helps each other, and there are very few that hold back, and that is not like the corporate world that I spent my entire life, where it was dog eat dog, and we used to say assholes and elbows. You're climbing over the other guy trying to get ahead. That that's it couldn't be further from that. And that's again me having spent my entire life in the finance business, including management in the finance business and international finance business. Unlikely background for a knife maker. Never would have guessed that I'd find myself making knives. Was never mechanically inclined. Never um, never artistic in any way. But gosh, I just I found something I really love, and it's been good to me. It's therapy for me to go in that shop and grind out some knives and make some for my friends and new friends that I meet. Just I get a lot of joy out of it.
yeah. That's cool. I mean,
So I'm going to take a breath. Say something.
yeah. I think it's cool. Specifically, I think um, I'm going to go back to your point about um, purists and hand grinding and everything like that. Is in the forge community, you can have like a banana shaped shank that you've pounded out on an anvil and everything and done absolutely nothing right, and sell it, and people are like, okay, that's authentic blacksmith, whatever, right? but but it seems like in the stock removal world, there's a lot of very retentive people that think that the only way is to, I don't know, everything has to be done. Now, I really respect sole authorship, and it is something that
I do too.
when you can
I do too.
do, but you know, how many how many of those really sourpuss type of opinions have kept people from being able to uh, enter the industry or whatever. And there's tools, if you have a disability, which I mean, arguably essential tremors is a disability that really
Sure.
keeps you from doing a lot of things. And now you're making knives. I mean, I've been following you since old COVID era. So I mean, when you started posting things online, especially when you went to Bob's shop and started posting more, I noticed
Yeah.
that there was
Yeah.
a turn in the way that you thought about execution on certain things. Like you could see it in how you were applying those lessons to your own work. And so I've been following you for a while, and you can see as your tooling um, gets better, and as the time that you learn certain things to get around disability, that your the entire dynamic of how you like your aesthetic and everything changes. But like something that interests me too is for everybody who thinks that knife making is difficult, add the technical challenge of having to contend with tremors and things like that, and it just gets exponentially harder. So the fact that you've gone from the very basics of knife making to being able to make a good quality knife, to me, honestly, it should be inspiration to everybody. I mean, those things to me are profound, especially speaking to Jerry's tooling, because I mean I've used his grinding jigs before. I'm kind of interested in getting one of his flat platens to do flat grinds on, because I mostly do all hollows today.
I, I, I do have a platen, one of his platens, and it's flat on one side. There's a
Uh
10-inch
huh.
wheel on the other side, so you can do hollow grinds on it, and that is also a game changer. At least it was for Bill, and I know it has been for others. And again, I go into guys' shops who are known guys, internationally known guys, and they have them. So that says something.
Yeah. Well, and like Tom Overinder. I mean, he's in Arlington. He's up the road from where I live, and he's very big on if you have the ability to have some type of repeatability in your operations, that to embrace it, right? Um, and I think that that's
Yes.
probably the difference too between some like guys that were machinists and things, and those who I don't know are not, because everybody that I've spoken to who really are like they're into being machinists and thinking about things mathematically and geometrically, in that
Yes.
and repeatability
Yes.
wise are all like, no, these are all like perfectly fine to use. Like you use all, like nobody says anything about using a rotary platen to make things round, or certain types of fixtures to grip or drill or mill or things like that. So I mean, why is it that much of a deal? So
Right.
I think that the the game is changing when it comes to knife making. And you might find if you get into like the computer side of things, that you might be able to buy a small CNC machine and have certain operations handled like that too, if you wanted to go like semi-production. But that's something that's a tool for disability.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't see myself doing that. I mean, I see Chris Taylor. Chris is an electrician, and he can bring in these old machines that, like I think everybody's surface grinder is 50 years old, um, and and he can make those work. He can wire them up and make them work, and he understands how it all works. And same with Tim. Tim's machinist. I mean, he knows how those machines work. Uh, got what are the machines that he got everybody involved in?
Panographs.
The ones that they do the
Yeah.
pantographs. Yeah, I mean, to take one of those old pantographs and figure it out and fix it, and then start doing shields with it. I mean, that's just crazy in my mind. There's no way I could conceive of that. I'm just an old finance guy, really a salesman, nothing more than that. Um, my brother was a college professor. Well, was a college professor. He's retired now, and I was a salesman. I got, I was luckily I got the good looks, so I could be a charming, good-looking guy and go out and sell because he got all the brains. uh, for me to be making knives, I'm honestly I'm making fixed blade knives. Don't have any ambition to get, especially after spending time with Tim, to get into folders, slip joints because I can't do it. My hands shake too much. I mean, I can't do. I can't work with those little screws, and I can't work with those machines. As far as the computer and programming and so forth, I guess I could do it, but I'm old, and uh, I guess I'm an old dog that doesn't want to learn any new tricks. I kind of like doing what I do, and there seems to be a relatively decent market for people to buy Bill Roden blades, uh, 50 or 100 or 150 a year, and that's all I want to do. I don't want to be famous. I just want to make knives and be able to cover my expenses and enjoy it, and hopefully bring some joy to the people that buy them. That really, when somebody sends me a picture of them cleaning a deer or whatever, cutting a piece of cake with one of my knives, I get the biggest charge out of that. So it's kind of fun. It's fun for me, and hopefully it's fun for the
Yeah.
people that buy them because my knives aren't perfect. They're far from it. But they are handmade knives. There's no doubt about that, and I love making them. So it's
Well, I was just gonna say, I saw recently that you're working on uh, a spike knife. Have you just decided on what you're gonna name it yet?
no, because I really don't care if I name it because I really don't want to make another one again. Uh, this one, I mean, I started from scratch. The guy, I can't say what the name of the Japanese uh, um, what's the word I'm looking for? The Japanese technique for processing fish. Uh, this is the spike is used for the first part of the process, which is instead of clubbing them with a club or a baseball bat to kill them, and I'm talking big fish, offshore swordfish, marlin, that kind of thing. You take the spike and poke it in their head and basically stick them in the brain with it, and they're dead right then.
Yeah.
And they're not flopping, they're not shaking, they're dead. And then they bleed them, and then they cut their tail and they run a wire up their spine somehow. And I don't remember what the fourth step is, but anyway, it's this elaborate process that they go through to supposedly greatly improve, like 100% improve the quality and the flavor of the fish. So I have a guy who I've known for years who asked me to make one of these. He's been using a screwdriver um, that was like 4 inches long and couldn't quite take care of a swordfish with that. So I made one that the spike's 7 inches long. It's pretty cool. I mean, it looks like something uh, medieval. Or something that the mafia might use, as a hitman might use, with this just a handle with a long spike. But that's fun. I made a grape harvesting knife for one of my guys, one of my customers, just which with a real strong hook on it, and that was hard. That was hard. In fact, um, I ended up sending that to. I hate being old. I drop names um, to one of my buddies who ground it for me because I had no idea how hard it was to grind an inside curve, and I made a tight inside curve. So he he struggled with it too. So he ground them for me, sent it back to me, and then I finished it and kind of figured out how to do those inside grinds. And now I'm making a hawk bill that's been pretty popular. And that hawk bill was specifically made for my son, who's a lineman. and they use those hawk bills to strip wire. So I made one for him, posted it, and other people were interested in it, and it's uh, it's become one of my more popular knives, which is pretty neat. And that's knife making, I guess. Jeff Mitchell is who I was trying to think of. Sorry, who did that inside grind for me. He's been helpful to me. We've never met, but we've talked on the phone and we've exchanged emails and texts. And again, that's just kind of part of the community. So making specific knives that are different than a plain old standard pocket drop point, which are my bread and butter. But making those special custom knives, that's I get a big kick out of that too. And honestly, you made a comment earlier, and I don't know if I'm going over. No, not yet. Um, you made a comment in one of your earlier podcasts. I think it was after Blade Show Texas about how slow the market is. And boy, that hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten slower. I know the secondary market for custom knives is really slow right now because I've tried to sell a few. And my own business has slowed down as far as people doing orders. But that's given me the opportunity uh, to exercise creativity and get involved in making that spike and uh, making one I called um, I called one a spike, and one with the top down. What do they spear whales with? What's that called?
Harpoon.
Harpoon. Okay, harpoon is what I called the knife, and I made a couple of those and sold them. I made a couple of cleavers and sold them. Don't have patterns with the water jet people and stuff like that. I just, people say, would you ever consider making this? So I do. And if I was really busy with making my standard blades, I wouldn't have time to do that. So I'm kind of enjoying taking a breath. And although I hope it does pick back up again in the fall.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, would you say, like, what does your customer base look like? I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to dig too far into your demographics or whatever, but like for somebody who's been in the world of collecting and who's been in the world uh, of making now for quite a while, do you find that your customer base is something that pulls from those relationships, or is it a lot of new people?
Yeah, some. Boy, it's all over the map. At first, it was friends and family. Um, I got on Facebook about the time I started selling knives. I had posted a few, and one of my old high school friends, which is what Facebook is good for, keep in touch with guys you haven't seen in 40 years. Um, asked me if I'd make him a knife, and I made him a knife, and then I made another knife and sold it, and then somebody else called, and it kind of snowballed. But again, friends and family to begin with. Um, but then, interestingly, I my Facebook group grew really fast. Um, Went from 0 to 1,500 people in 3 months, maybe. But now it's just sitting there at around 1,700. So every so often somebody new will come in. It's friends and family. One, it is some old colleagues, and I consider those friends. But and then they've word of mouth through word of mouth have sold some for me to their friends, or introduced their friends to me. Um, I sell knives, it's surprising to me, all over the country. Most I sell in Pennsylvania, where I grew up, so they're the friends and family up there. Um, as far as units, that's probably where I've sold the most, or Texas, which is where I live now and have worked for a number of years. Um, the the knives I've sold a lot to people that I worked with or were former clients. Now that you mention it, I want to say seat of the pants, 30% of the knives that I've sold. And part of that is because I've got one customer, actually the one who ordered the spike, has since sold his business, but he was a used equipment dealer. He bought half a dozen knives last Christmas, or the Christmas before last, uh, that I put his logo on, and he gave to his good customers. And I've got another customer now who has done the same thing, another dealer who has just ordered 10. And that's going to hopefully get me through the hump here, over the hump in the dog days of summer, because I've got those 10 knives to make. And he's going to give them to customers. So that's 16 knives right there. And then the guys themselves have bought knives. I've got a client out in North Carolina, same thing, one of my construction equipment dealers who has bought, one of my best customers. He's bought maybe 4 or 5 knives from me. So, and that's interesting to me because my knives, again, are no Tom Krein knives or no Chris Taylor knives or no, certainly not any Luke Swenson knives, but uh, they're not uh, anything like those knives as far as the perfection and the fit and finish that those guys put in or that those guys produce. But I have a lot of customers who've bought one and then they bought another and then they bought, ended up buying 4 or 5 knives from me, and that's fascinating to me. Um, I like to do a lot with handle material. I get a big kick out of that. So varied handle material and what I can do with burls and mammoth tooth and you name it. Uh, I think that attracts people. Using different colors and different shapes and different materials. I think that attracts people. Um, that's my best guess at why those people buy multiple knives. I'm glad they do. I mean, I love them. That keeps me going. And again, that's gratifying to me that somebody would think enough of not just buying one knife from the shaky hands guy, but to buy another and then another and then another. Because beyond one, it's not a novelty. They obviously like the knives, so that that kind of tickles me
Yeah.
for a guy who's, like I said, just been doing this for a couple 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I also think like I've tried to make it a point through the podcast to illustrate the fact that like your brand or who you are is like an essential component of selling knives and the marketability of your brand, right? And, I mean,
Absolutely,
and I think that
absolutely,
if people are buying your stuff, it's as much because they're buying it from you as it is that they're buying a knife product, right? So
absolutely. The knives that I collect are from people I know. They're from knife makers that I know, no doubt about it.
yeah,
And I'm sure that's the same way with the people who are buying my knives. They're buying me as much as they're buying my knives, which I totally appreciate. Like I said, find kind of shocking, but it's fun. It's definitely fun.
yeah. So how do you feel about applying your collector's eye to your work? And do you find like inside of the collector circles? Because I know that you're friends with Charlie Brock, and you guys go out and you guys kind of have your little like parties that you like you bring people together to when they're at shows and stuff. Like how does that look with you making knives and still being in the collector circle? Like, are you still paring down your collection, or are you just refining it with other blades, or kind of like what does that look like?
Yeah, I I I don't buy as many as I used to. Um, I've actually sold some to Charlie uh, when I needed to buy something else, or wanted to buy something else, or decided to sell a knife and buy steel. Um, but that first knife, let me put it this way: that first knife that I made, with Chris Taylor at his shop in Northwest Arkansas was really, it was totally my design. Didn't copy anything, but I got to say, it was heavily influenced by the Tom Krein, what does he call it? And Chris Taylor's, uh, shit. Uh, anyway, Chris Taylor's knives and Tom Krein's knives. Uh, very much influenced by those, and not anything like theirs, but kind of a homogenization of those, and then putting my own twist on it. And that's probably what all my knives are. I enough knives have been made and enough designs have been made that there's probably nothing original. But yeah, like my Hawkbill, I drew up my Hawkbill. I was real excited about it, and then it dawned on me I'd seen that design by somebody else, and I dug and dug and dug, and I finally found that it was a guy in Brazil. Uh, uh, Fabio Santos is his name, who, and his was a folder, a Hawkbill folder, but it has, the blade shape isn't just round on top and round on the bottom. It has kind of a square top on it. And I wrote to him and said, man, I copied your knife uh, subconsciously, but I know I did. And before I make it a standard knife in my repertoire, I'd like your permission to do that. And he obviously was very happy to do it. And I have three of his knives sitting in my collection now. So yeah, collecting and making knives certainly have blended together. And I appreciate knife makers even more now that I'm making knives. I mean, I know how many steps there are. You know, you just, you do it. It's not three steps to make a fixed blade knife. It's, I don't know how many, 30. Um, it really adds up, and people don't think about it, but I appreciate that when I see somebody else's knife and how clean it is and how well it's, the fit and finish on it is. I'm fascinated by knives that people make. Jerry Moen is a good example of that. The knives that he's made over the years, just spectacular workmanship. Uh, Bob's the same. Well, there's so many. There's so many. Bubba Crouch, some of those knives that he puts out are with Alice's engraving on them, just crazy. And do those things influence me? Sure they do. They sure do.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting about knife making in general is that, when you're collecting knives, you're like, man, like $300-400, that's kind of high, right?
Yeah,
And then when you start making them, you're like, man, those $300 or $400 is hard earned
yeah, it
because
really is. Really
you
is.
spent a long, yeah. I mean, and I think that's, when you think about the material that goes into something, so like maybe you have 20 $25 after heat treat in a single blade, and
Yeah,
then you have your handle material. So I mean, so maybe you have $100 in it, but the thing that you don't get back is your time, oftentimes, and that does kind of add to the cost factor. But
your time and the glue and the gloves and the light bill and the machines don't come cheap, and the belts that you have to replace, on an ongoing basis, and the discs for your disc grinders, and uh, you know, belts that break on your saws that you got to repair. It's constant, and I'm not complaining, but it's not a real money making business. It's at least not for me. It's the guys that are full time knife makers. I take my hat off to. That's a tough way to make a living because uh, it is the time it takes to make a knife. People just don't see and don't account for. I totally agree with you.
yeah, well, and like I think that's something I think is important to note is. when you have the ability to collect knives or to support makers, sometimes that's a difference between make or break. I mean, I know that
Absolutely.
in the past with my career, there's been times where it's just like, man, I would like to be able to sell some knives in order to be able to make some more knives, or
Yeah.
I'd like to be able to go to this show, but I need to make
Yeah.
knives now and sell them. So it's kind of one of those things where there's as much as like as a maker, you don't necessarily focus on the selling. If you're not concerned about the selling so much, then it kind of makes it difficult. I mean, either that or you just have alternate
Yeah.
income, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. I try to, to keep the knife business self-supporting. I try not to just take money out of the family budget to buy uh, walrus ivory because it's shiny and I think it's pretty cool and I'd like to have some. I won't say I've never done it, but I try not to. I try to keep knife money and knife expenses coming out of the same pot and going into the same pot. It is not easy. It is
Yeah,
not
I know
easy.
that, and I think that's what's difficult with me. Like I'm kind of partial to handled material. I do like collecting it, especially really great pieces of ancient materials or woods.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
all do. I
and
think
that
I have a lifetime supply of materials in my shop right now, and I got some in this week, but there's a lifetime supply already in there. So we're all
yeah,
the same.
yeah. Well, I mean that's all I think really interesting. I I would normally ask closer to the end of the interview what makers have as advice for new makers and things like that. And at least initially when it comes to what you've talked about and how you got into it, I think that's to me it's inspirational because I do think that there's a lot of people who hold themselves back from getting into knives or other craft hobbies because of something, right? Whether it is disability or whether it's age or things like that, and when I look at you and also the progression of your quality and everything, I'm proud of you, and I enjoy seeing
Thank
those
you.
things. But is there any other types of advice? Anything that is like a zero to getting started in the business that you'd like other knife makers
I,
to know?
I don't think so. I mean, you're going to nick your fingers and you're going to nick your knuckles and you're going to want to keep band-aids in the shop, but don't be afraid of that. I know you mentioned 6 months ago or so, I got tangled up with my disc grinder in the table and changed my fingerprints on a couple of fingers. But it's just
Hmm.
I said some French words and went to see my father-in-law, who was a retired doctor, and we got me put patched back together. But I was back in the shop, you know, within a couple of days. Uh, it's just you tend to get discouraged. It isn't easy getting started. Um, it seems pretty daunting to get those bevel lines straight and to not over grind your edges sometimes. And I mean, and I still do it, but it's just part of it. Just don't get discouraged. Keep on doing it, and you will end up making some pretty doggone nice knives. So, and there will be people uh, in your life and not in your life who you'll meet who will be interested in your knives, even if you're just making the most basic of knives. I see that, and you can testify to this. I go to like Blade Show Texas, and uh, and I go around to the different booths, and I see some beautiful knives, um, just extraordinary knives for not very much money. And then I see knives that are just like those or no better than those, and they're selling for a lot of money. But it's just time and exposure and keeping at it that I think, like in anything else, you have to do to be successful, to sell knives and to learn how to make knives and to progress. I've come a long way. I agree. but I've got a long way to go. And seeing those guys' knives, collecting, uh, as you mentioned, collecting helps me stay humble because I see those knives that are out there that people make that are just incredible to me. I don't know how they do it. But that's a goal one of these days.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's something I've noticed, like in like pricing your work and selling at shows and things like that. I mean, there's so many different avenues to sell now. That's really hard to compare your work uh, to other people. What I've found, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is the secret sauce is you just have to keep your head down and do your thing, and that's the only thing that you have in knives is yourself, as the maker, right? And you have to be able to invest in that and to promote it.
I think
Yeah,
that's good advice. I think that's good advice. Do what you do, and stick to it. And there'll be people that are interested in that. Just like I said, it's a matter of time and exposure. I haven't been to any. I haven't displayed in any of the blade shows, but I have signed up, and I am going to go to Blade, Texas next year. Have a table, so that'll be interesting. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully, I'm one of those guys who sells some of his knives, at least enough to cover the expenses. But it'll be nice. The reason I want to do it, beyond getting the experience and hopefully selling a few knives, is I went to Blade, Texas, as you did, and you and I didn't see each other. We didn't meet each other, and that drives me crazy. You're not the only one who I really wanted to connect with at Blade, Texas, and didn't, because there are just so many people and so much going on, and you don't recognize each other when you haven't really met before. So having a table, I think I'll be able to meet more people who I know through Facebook, who I know through being knife makers and so forth, uh, than I did when I was just kind of walking the floor. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
yeah, yeah. I think that all the blade related shows that I've been to, it's just been a lot of overwhelming. And just like everybody kind of has their own agenda
Yeah.
as they're going to the shows, and it's hard to meet up with everybody. But like it's not that way with like Lost Pines Knife Show. I'm going to be going to that. I'm sure it'll be a good show, but it's never been like the same kind of like frantic. Everybody, everybody's kind of crazy and
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed and like overstimulated that it is with Blade Show. So, but like you're up in Northlake area, right? I mean, if ever you want to get together for
Yeah.
beers or coffee
Yeah.
or something like that, I'm only about 35 minutes away. So, I mean, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah. There are a lot of knife guys in the
Yeah,
DFW area that
yeah,
I haven't met. And there are a lot of them. So
yeah,
you're one of them. So yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
for
I'm
sure.
up for that.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you sharing yourself with us and talking through everything, especially with your disability. I I will say that.
Sure. Well, I hope it didn't bore
Uh,
anybody to death. Uh, I can talk,
Yeah,
as I've proved.
you make my job easy. I'm sitting here on a beach in paradise, and for me, you're making this like the easiest interview ever. So whatever. Yeah,
Well, good,
but it's
good.
definitely a pleasure to get to know you more through this avenue. And I mean, I'm a fan. I'll continue
Well,
to
thanks, Aaron.
track your work, and if you ever need anything, I'm just a hop, skip, and a jump down the road. So
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and get on the podcast. Maybe spread the word a little bit more about Bill Roden blades. That's
yeah.
much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put all of your details to social media inside of the show notes, so people can reach out and talk to you and get to know you more in your work beyond this conversation. But I hope that in some way, shape, or form, people can reach out and maybe buy something from you because I do appreciate the effort that you put into your work, and you're a real cool guy, and it's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.